the sound that tore through the humid afternoon air wasn't just a scream. It was the primal, terrifying sound of a woman watching her world collapse. "Get away from my door!" I shrieked, the vibration tearing at my throat, my vocal cords straining against the sheer volume of my rage, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Frantic and bruising, threatening to give out right then and there, I stood on the pavement, my suitcase dropping from my trembling hand, hitting the concrete with a dull thud that seemed to signal the end of my life as I knew it. Directly in front of me, kneeling on the porch of the Victorian home I had meticulously maintained for 4 decades, were the 2 people I was supposed to trust more than anyone else in the world. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Jessica, were frozen in place like deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming train, their hands gripping crowbars and screwdrivers that were jammed into the brass lock of my front door. Behind them, a massive, rusted rental truck idled on the curb, its cavernous maw wide open, already swallowing the antique mahogany sideboard that had belonged to my great-grandmother. "Mom?" Daniel's voice cracked. A pathetic, high-pitched squeak that didn't belong to a 32-year-old man. His face drained of color so rapidly I thought he might faint, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the Georgia heat. The crowbar slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered onto the wooden porch, the metallic ring echoing through the silent neighborhood like a gunshot. "You were supposed to be in Vermont," he whispered, as if my presence were a hallucination, a glitch in his reality. Jessica, always the quicker thinker, always the sharper tongue, scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting frantically from me to the truck and back again. She smoothed her dress with trembling hands, a futile attempt to regain composure. "Evelyn, listen, we were just checking on the place," she stammered, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "Checking on the place with a moving truck and a crowbar?" I took a step forward, the shock beginning to curdle into a cold, hard fury that settled in the pit of my stomach. But before I tell you how I unleashed the wrath of a lifetime upon my own flesh and blood, I need to tell you how I arrived at this devastating moment. I need to explain how a simple disruption in travel plans unraveled the tapestry of lies that had been covering my eyes for years. My name is Evelyn Thorne. I am 72 years old, and for the past 4 years, I have been a widow navigating the silent, echoing halls of a life built for 2. My husband, Arthur, was a man of integrity, a man who believed that a handshake was a binding contract, and that family was the bedrock of civilization. When he died of a sudden heart attack, he took the colors of my world with him. I thought that losing him was the absolute limit of pain a human heart could endure. I thought I had reached the bottom of the well of sorrow. I was wrong. The pain I felt standing on that sidewalk, watching my only child attempting to pillage my sanctuary, was a different species of agony. It was sharper, toxic, a betrayal that sliced through the bone. The day had begun with the deceptive promise of renewal. I had woken at 5 in the morning, the Georgia humidity already clinging to the windows. I brewed my coffee, black and strong, and checked my luggage for the 10th time. My cousin Sarah, who lived in the crisp, cool mountains of Vermont, had been begging me to visit for months. "Evelyn, you are rotting away in that big old house," she would say during our Sunday calls. "You need fresh air. You need to see leaves that change color. You need to remember who you are, outside of being Arthur's widow." She was right. Since the funeral, my world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the Thorne estate. The house Arthur and I had restored with our own hands, where we had raised Daniel, where every scratch on the floorboards held a memory of a toy car, or a dropped pot during a chaotic Thanksgiving dinner. The taxi had arrived promptly at 7. I locked the heavy oak door, the click of the deadbolt feeling like a temporary period at the end of a sentence. I tucked the keys into the inner pocket of my purse, feeling a flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. Daniel knew I was leaving. I had given him the itinerary weeks ago. He had even come over the previous evening, hugging me stiffly and telling me to have a safe flight, his eyes shifting away from mine. I had interpreted his distance as concern for my health, or perhaps the awkwardness of a son who didn't quite know how to handle his aging mother's independence. Now, standing on the sidewalk, I realized that his visit had been a reconnaissance mission. He hadn't been saying goodbye. He had been verifying the timeline of the heist. The drive to the airport was uneventful, but the chaos began the moment I stepped into the terminal. The departure board was a sea of red text. A massive storm system was battering the East Coast, grounding flights from Atlanta to Boston. I sat at the gate for 3 hours, reading the same page of my novel over and over again, unable to focus. Finally, the announcement came. Flight canceled. Rescheduling available for tomorrow morning. Most people groaned, pulled out their phones, or stormed the customer service desk. But a strange, cold sensation washed over me. It was a whisper in the back of my mind, a tug in my gut that Arthur used to call the thorn intuition. Go home, the voice said. Do not wait for tomorrow. Go home, now. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was just the desire to sleep in my own bed. But the urgency grew until my hands were shaking. I grabbed my suitcase, bypassed the rebooking line, and marched straight to the taxi stand. The ride back took 45 minutes. And with every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. I watched the Spanish moss, draping over the oak trees, pass by, feeling a sense of foreboding that made the air in the cab feel thin. When the taxi turned onto Elm Street, my eyes immediately scanned for the familiar silhouette of my house. That was when I saw it. The truck. It was a monstrosity of white metal and dirt, parked haphazardly on my manicured lawn, crushing the hydrangeas I had planted with Arthur 20 years ago. My first thought was innocent. Perhaps a neighbor was moving, and the driver was incompetent. But as we got closer, the details sharpened into focus. The truck was backed up to my walkway. The ramp was deployed. And there, kneeling at my door like common criminals, were Daniel and Jessica. I paid the driver, my fingers fumbling with the cash, and stepped out. The realization hit me in waves. They weren't just breaking in. They were moving me out. What are you doing? I screamed again, walking up the path, my legs feeling like lead. I looked past them, into the dark cavern of the truck. My eyes adjusted to the shadows inside, and a sob caught in my throat. I saw the velvet armchair where I sat to read every evening. I saw the boxes of books, Arthur's collection of first editions that he had cherished more than gold. I saw the silver tea set wrapped poorly in an old blanket. Robert scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over the toolbox he had brought. "Mom, please, it's not what it looks like," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shade of the porch. "We can explain." "Explain?" I hissed, my voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "Explain why you are drilling the lock off my house? Explain why my living room is currently sitting in the back of a rental truck? Are you stealing from me, Daniel? Are you robbing your own mother?" Jessica stepped in front of him, her chin jutting out in a defiant pose that I had seen too many times over the years. "We aren't stealing, Evelyn. We're family. We were safeguarding your things." "Safeguarding?" I laughed, a harsh, barking sound that lacked any humor. "You thought I was gone for 2 weeks. You weren't safeguarding anything. You were stripping the carcass clean." I pushed past them, mounting the stairs with a burst of adrenaline that defied my age. I looked at the door. The wood around the lock was splintered. They had been at it for a while, clumsy and brutal. "I want to see inside the truck," I demanded. "Mom, don't," Daniel pleaded, reaching a hand out but stopping short of touching me when he saw the recoil in my eyes. "You don't need to see this." I walked down the ramp, my heels clicking on the metal. I marched into the belly of the beast. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just furniture. It was everything. They had packed my life into cardboard boxes. I saw jewelry boxes. I saw the painting of the coastline Arthur had bought for our 30th anniversary. I saw the small, rosewood urn that held the ashes of our golden retriever, Buster. They had taken the dog, for God's sake. How much? I asked, my voice trembling as I touched the cold wood of my dining table. How much did you think you'd get for my life? Daniel appeared at the bottom of the ramp, looking like a child caught breaking a vase. Mom, we're in trouble. Deep trouble. I turned on him. Trouble? You don't know the meaning of the word yet, Daniel. But you are about to learn. Is this the first time? The question hung in the heavy air. Daniel looked at his shoes. Jessica looked at the sky. Answer me! I roared. No, Jessica said, her voice devoid of shame. We've come by before. When you go to the market, when you have your doctor's appointments. You're getting forgetful, Evelyn. We knew you wouldn't notice a few things missing here and there. My knees nearly gave out. All those times I had searched for a misplaced ring or a silver serving spoon. Thinking my mind was slipping, I had spent nights crying. Terrified that I was developing dementia. Terrified that I was losing my faculties just like my aunt had. I had even gone to a neurologist for a cognitive assessment. And all this time, it wasn't my mind. It was my son. You let me believe I was going crazy, I whispered, the betrayal stinging my eyes. You let me doubt my own sanity so you could pawn my silverware? We needed the money! Daniel burst out, tears streaming down his face now. The debt! Mom! It's drowning us. The credit cards, the car payments, the mortgage on the condo. We're 3 months behind on everything. They're going to take the car. They're going to evict us. So you decided to evict me instead? I countered. You decided that because you cannot manage your finances, I don't deserve a home? You have too much, Jessica shouted, finally dropping the mask. Look at this place. Evelyn, it's a mansion for one old woman. You're sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars of equity in antiques, hoarding it all like a dragon, while we are eating ramen noodles and dodging calls from collectors. It's not fair. Fair? I stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. I worked for 50 years. Arthur worked until the day he died. We sacrificed vacations. We drove old cars. We saved every penny to build this life. You want what we have without the decades of work it took to get it. You are not a victim, Jessica. You are a predator. And you, I said, turning to Daniel, you are a coward. You let her convince you that robbing your mother was a solution? I looked back at the truck. Where is the sapphire brooch? The one your father gave me when you were born. I checked my jewelry box last week and couldn't find it. I thought I had misplaced it. Where is it? Silence stretched between us. We sold it, Daniel whispered. Where? The pawn shop on 4th Street. And the coin collection. And Dad's vintage camera. My heart shattered. The brooch was meant to be passed down to his daughter, if he ever had one. The coin collection was something he and Arthur had built together, Sunday after Sunday. Heads bent over magnifying glasses. He hadn't just sold metal. He had sold the bonding moments of his childhood. Get it out, I commanded, pointing to the truck. Put it all back. Now. We can't, Jessica sneered. The truck is rented until 5. We have a buyer lined up for the furniture in an hour. We can't just undo this. You have a buyer? I felt bile rise in my throat. You were going to sell my furniture to strangers while I was in Vermont? Yes, and you were never going to know, Jessica yelled. We were going to tell you there was a break-in, that the neighborhood is getting unsafe, that maybe it was time for you to move into a facility, somewhere smaller, somewhere cheaper. The cruelty of the plan took my breath away. They weren't just stealing my things. They were gaslighting me into a nursing home. They wanted to erase my independence to cover their greed. I pulled my phone from my purse. My hands were shaking, but I dialed the number I knew by heart. Martha. She was a retired federal judge who lived 3 houses down. She was fierce, loyal, and terrifying. Martha, I said when she answered. I need you to come to my house. Immediately. Bring your phone to record, and bring your cane. Is it intruders? Martha asked, her voice instantly sharp. Worse, I said, staring at my son. It's family. I hung up and glared at them. You have two choices. You can start unloading this truck right now, putting every single item back exactly where it belongs, or I can call the police. And given the value of what is in this truck, this isn't petty theft, Daniel. This is grand larceny. This is a felony. You will go to prison for years. You wouldn't, Daniel said, his face pale. I'm your son. I am looking for my son, I said, my voice cracking. But I don't see him. I see a thief who tried to gaslight his mother into a nursing home. Start unloading. Now. Martha arrived 3 minutes later, moving with a speed that belied her age. She took in the scene, the truck, the shamefaced couple, my tear-stained face, and understood immediately. She didn't say a word. She simply pulled out her smartphone, hit record, and stood by my side like a sentinel. Under Martha's watchful lens and my icy glare, Daniel and Jessica began to unload. It was grueling work. The humidity was oppressive. They hauled the heavy mahogany table back up the ramp, sweating and panting. They carried boxes of books, lamps, and rugs. Neighbors began to come out onto their porches, watching the spectacle. I didn't care. Let them see. Let the shame burn. It took them 4 hours. By the time the truck was empty, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. The house was a mess. Boxes piled everywhere, but my things were back inside. Well, most of them. I stood in the foyer, the air thick with the smell of sweat and resentment. The brooch, the coins, the camera, and God knows what else were gone. Sit down, I ordered. They collapsed onto the sofa they had tried to steal hours earlier. You mentioned a power of attorney, I said, remembering a comment Jessica had made earlier about managing my affairs. Daniel looked at the floor. You signed it 2 years ago, before your hip surgery, I remembered. It was supposed to be a limited power, just to handle medical bills while I was under anesthesia. I want it revoked, I said. And I want a full list of everything you have stolen over the last year. Every ring, every coin, every silver spoon. And you are going to pay me back. Every single cent. We don't have money, Jessica shrieked. That's the whole point. Then you will find it, I said, calm, cold steel in my voice. You will sell your car. You will sell that condo you can't afford. You will get second jobs. I don't care if you have to scrub floors or dig ditches. You have exactly 30 days. 1 month. If I do not have the full value of my missing items, and I estimate that to be around $20,000 in my hand in 30 days, I will hand this recording and Martha's testimony over to the district attorney. Mom? 20,000? Daniel choked. That's impossible. You stole my life, Daniel, I screamed, losing my composure for the last time. You stole your father's memory. You put a price tag on my love for you and sold it for pennies. 20,000 is a bargain compared to the cost of your soul. Now get out. Give me your keys. What? Daniel blinked. The keys to my house. He reached into his pocket and handed over the brass key ring. I snatched it from his hand. Get out of my house. Do not come back until you have a cashier's check. Do not call me unless it is to tell me you have the money. If you set foot on this property without my permission, I will call the police. Go. They left. Defeated and angry, the moving truck rumbling away like a retreating tank. As soon as the taillights disappeared, I collapsed. Martha caught me before I hit the floor. She held me while I wailed. A guttural, animal sound of grief that I had been holding back for hours. I cried not for the things, but for the loss of the illusion that I was safe, the illusion that I was loved unconditionally. Martha stayed with me that night. We didn't sleep. We drank whiskey and made a list. We went room by room, identifying the empty spaces on shelves, the gaps in jewelry boxes. The total was staggering. The emotional toll was incalculable. The next morning, I didn't rest. I called a locksmith at 8 a.m. By noon, every lock in the house had been changed. I installed deadbolts on the interior doors. I called my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and scheduled an emergency meeting. Mr. Henderson was grave when I told him the story. He reviewed the power of attorney document Daniel had given him years ago. "Mrs. Thorne, this isn't a medical power of attorney," he said, adjusting his glasses. "This is a general durable power of attorney. It gives him the right to sell your real estate, access your bank accounts, and make unilateral financial decisions." I felt the blood drain from my face. He had tricked me. He had slipped a broad document in among the hospital admission papers, knowing I was in pain and trusting him implicitly. "Revoke it," I said, my voice trembling. "Revoke it all, and draft a restitution agreement." The next 30 days were the longest of my life. The house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a fortress. I jumped at every noise. I checked the locks 5 times a night. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, guarded by the ghosts of the betrayal. Daniel called me once a week. I kept the calls short. He sounded exhausted. He told me he was working shifts at a warehouse at night and delivering pizzas during the day. He told me Jessica had left him. Apparently, once the gravy train of my potential inheritance was derailed, and the reality of hard labor set in, her commitment to the marriage evaporated. I felt a twinge of pity, but I squashed it. He had made his bed. The deadline arrived on a rainy Tuesday. I sat in the living room, Martha by my side for support. The doorbell rang at exactly 5 p.m. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there. He looked terrible. He had lost 20 pounds. His hands were blistered and rough. There were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He was alone. "Come in," I said stiffly. He walked in and stood in the center of the room. Not daring to sit, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here," he said, his voice hoarse. I opened it. It was a stack of cash and a cashier's check. I counted it. $15,000. "It's not 20, he said quickly, seeing the look on my face. "It's 15,000. I sold the car. I sold my watch. I sold my golf clubs. I've been working 80 hours a week. I tried to get a loan, but with my credit, this is everything I could get." He fell to his knees. It was a dramatic gesture, but it felt genuine. He wasn't acting anymore. He was broken. "Mom, please. I'll pay the rest. I swear. I'll pay you $500 a month for the rest of my life if I have to. Just, please don't send me to jail. I lost Jessica. I lost my condo. I'm living in a motel room. I have nothing left but this job and the hope that you won't destroy me." I looked at my son. I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions. I saw the teenager who crashed his first car and cried in my arms. And I saw the man who had betrayed me. I looked at Martha. She gave me a small nod. The decision was mine. I took a deep breath. "Stand up, Daniel." He stood, trembling. "I am not going to call the police," I said. He let out a sob of relief so loud it shook his frame. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." "But," I continued, raising my hand to stop him, "this does not fix us. You paid the money, or most of it. That keeps you out of prison. It does not get you back into my life." "Not yet." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I understand. You are going to sign a promissory note for the remaining $5,000. I said. "You will pay me monthly, and you are going to go to counseling. You need to understand why you let yourself be manipulated, and why you felt entitled to my life." "I will," he promised. "I'll do anything. I will let her." I walked to the door and held it open. "You can go now." He paused at the threshold. Can I hug you?" I looked at him. My heart ached to hold him, to tell him it was all okay. But it wasn't okay. And if I hugged him now, I would be erasing the lesson. I would be telling him that forgiveness is cheap. "No, Daniel," I said softly. "Not today. You broke something that money can't fix. You have to earn that hug back. And it's going to take a long time." He lowered his head, accepting the judgment. "Goodbye, Mom." "Goodbye, Daniel." I closed the door and locked it. The heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding into place resonated through the house. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. Martha put a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Evelyn. It was hard, but it was right." "I know," I whispered. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new rhythm. Daniel paid his monthly installments religiously. He wrote me letters, actual, handwritten letters, apologizing, sharing his progress in therapy, telling me about his life without asking for a thing. We started to meet for coffee once a month. Neutral ground, short visits. I didn't give him a key. I never would again. The locks on my house remained changed, a permanent reminder of the boundary that had been drawn. I realized something profound in the silence of my reclaimed home. We often think of boundaries as walls that shut people out, as acts of coldness or rejection. But as I sat in my armchair, reading a book from the collection I had saved, I understood that boundaries are actually the most loving thing we can establish. They are the structure that allows relationships to survive without collapsing under the weight of resentment. I had saved my house. I had saved my dignity. And by refusing to rescue my son from the consequences of his actions, by forcing him to face the wreckage he had created, I might have actually saved him too. I touched the locket around my neck, the one piece of jewelry I had been wearing that day, the one thing they couldn't steal. It held Arthur's picture. I looked at his kind eyes and knew he would be proud. I wasn't just a widow waiting to die anymore. I was the matriarch of this family, the guardian of its legacy. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely, powerfully whole. The lock on the door wasn't just to keep thieves out. It was to keep my peace in, and that was a treasure worth more than any antique in the world.